What a pleasure to introduce Greg Steltenpohl, true visionary in the natural foods industry. I think of Greg as really one of my lifelong learning buddies. We've known each other over 30 years. And Greg really has a prescient sense of what's coming next. And his latest success is Califia Farms. I had the great honor to work with him at Odwalla back in the mid-1990s. And he's been consistently successful at identifying new trends. And we thought he would be the best person we could think of to think about how the dairy world is evolving with plant futures. So Greg, please take it away. Welcome. Thanks for being here and for all your support as an advisor as we formulated the conference and the symposium.
Thank you so much, Will, and hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Glad everybody's hanging in there to the bitter end here. And I've been on a lot of the talks along the way as well. I'll give a little bit of my own background real quickly. And as Will said, I started my career in the food business with Odwalla back in 1980. So my own perspective that you'll hear today is really informed by, I hate to say it, more than 4 decades of involvement as mostly an entrepreneur, sometimes as a funder and investor, but mostly doing my own entrepreneurship. So I try to bring a unique perspective to that and to the dynamic nature of the plant-based food system that we're envisioning as part of a greater movement towards healthier food. So to honor the spirit of what the title of the talk was, I'm going to hit at the beginning just a few nuts and bolts slides about plant-based dairy and some grounding. But then I want to hit in the last 10 minutes what I'd really like to talk about, which is how a systems approach and this emergent group and culture that's partially being formed at Berkeley, but is part of a global network. So next slide, just to show you the adoption of plant-based dairy around the world, kind of broke this up in 5 different global, readiness states. The darkest red being what I call mainstreaming, not necessarily fully mainstream, meaning the predominant culture, but really quite well adopted by and aware of by a majority of the consumer. The lighter shades going to the darker shades are all lesser stage of readiness. But the chief takeaway is if you look at Asia, it's by far the largest area, as everybody knows the population, but also quite a bit underdeveloped relative to the United States so far. Next slide. Just in nuts and bolts, just to get our arm around it, the current market overview, and this is a global plant-based market at 21 billion, and this is up from just 7.4 in 2010. So in just over a decade, it's almost tripled. So for trends in food or changes in food consumption, this is a massive, massive change. Next slide. Most of this is being driven, and forgive me that I've got Califia in the center of this. It was, a slide I used to explain our positioning. But if you see, there's 4 quadrants for how the food industry tackles all this. One is through distribution, the other's through conglomeration. The other is, the dairy intersection of the dairy and the coffee industry, which is a massive consumption point that really isn't fully understood. And the last is the dairy industry itself, going all the way back to the cows. The next slide really shows the consumer dynamic that's driving this. And this is narrowing down into the US, where you see a circle in the middle, where the emergent and disruptive brands are now pushing up against what the larger context of dairy, where the bigger players like Dean Foods, Horizon and Organic, Lactate in lactose-free, Fairlife in a concentrated protein, and Silk trying to, really present a very mainstream view of dairy. But this is being driven in a dynamic way between four different drivers: health and taste, social and environmental, the digital and communication dynamics, and then various tribes and community. And by that, I mean dietary tribes and social tribes. Next slide. When you drill down even further, we find that plant-based dairy is really comprised of some subsegments. Some of them, which really started it, were people, in the 15% now, which is the minority, which were dairy sensitives. And these are people who just can't tolerate it at all. The market now is only 15% driven by that. Then, routine loyalists, people who have already developed the habits, have about 20%. People who are looking for taste and really where the mimicry of dairy or a new taste are driving it. Then you have people who are really driven by budget on the upper left, and then people who want variety and change. So these are the different subsegments of people who are really currently comprising it. Now, the next slide, I want to show you where it's going. This is the progression of value as we go from the blue crescent at the bottom, which is just foundational health concerns, where people, this is how the movement started. All natural, plant-based gateway products, just tasting good, lower sugar and clean label. Then the next circle up is daily well-being, where people try to incorporate it throughout their daily habits. Next, moving up to enhanced nutrition, where the micronutrient supplementation and protein supplementation start to become important. And then finally, medical functional performance, all which leads to the big prize, which is people transforming their own lives. And that's where we want to go, a little bit deeper. Next slide. So what I've tried to do here is show you, for brands entering the space, there really are strategic considerations, both in terms of what's driving the growth on the left in the green, and then the competitive advantages that entrepreneurs can find in order to really find their niche and their unique point of difference, which is what, the key job is, to fill the need state. So remember that in this dynamic, the growth drivers are being driven by need states. What entrepreneurs have to do is find the way in and find a unique thing that they can do better along the way. So something, I summarize all that by something different, something better, through what plants can do. So I'm going to pause here for just a second, stop my section on, just giving you a mini plant-based dairy overview, and talk about what I think the biggest systems challenge is. So the next slide. This slide really, I think, drives home for me, from being a graphically driven person, how we're facing a completely unique choice point in history. We're past 2010, roughly in the middle of the slide. We're heading over, on the lower dark pathway since 2010 to 2020 in the business as usual model. So if we do not pull out and at least engender society to go after that middle orange path at a minimum, we will head into, the dystopian futures that we see so much on TV. So as, in a systems approach, what's the challenge here? So next slide. Underneath all this is really, how do we change? The number one place to intervene in a system is our own mental model and understanding of that system. The biggest system we have is that we have a current reality that looks like the picture we just saw. We have an emergent feature that is possible that looks like that upper green scenario that we saw in the prior slide. And we have a heritage of ancestors and a living past that has provided the constraints to and the contingency to what we can do today. So it's very important that we understand the system dynamics of world building and how we create an emergent future. This takes two essential elements, imagination and will. And those just happen to be the same characteristics that entrepreneurs, just are their basic DNA. So the union of entrepreneurship with systems change is absolutely an essential marriage. And the next slide is sort of my take on what could be a plant-based future food manifesto. And beyond mentioning regenerative agriculture, you have to understand that the food system itself has to be regenerated, because it is not just us marketing plant-based foods. It's the fact that the food system itself is, the largest cause of disease in the world today. Poor diet is the number one cause of death on the planet. And the normalization of junk food into diet and artificial and inefficient non-nutrient items is been normalized by our food system. So the real pandemic that exists today is the pandemic of obesity and poor diet, and that is driving COVID deaths as well. So I've tried to frame this in the largest possible way for us all to think about, because we must and we can return food to its original nourishing purpose, but we're not going to do it by just getting married to biotech and AI. But we're going to do it by having a co-evolutionary and interspecies process, by truly having the humility to partner with the power of plants and biological intelligence, what I'm calling BI, to work together for the evolution of a quantum change. That's going to take quantum planetary intelligence. So I've made up a little acronym, QPI equals human intelligence plus biological intelligence times AI. And quantum computing is about to emerge. And if we apply living systems as our sensory partners, we will be able to marry the knowledge base with the level of change that we're going to require. So I've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to distill some of these ideas in much simpler. Next slide. Just the key essential element about plant foods and why it's systemic is because it addresses personal health, planetary health, and public health. It head-on addresses in a material way the climate change imperative. It introduces the ability to include animal health, diversity and inclusion, race and classes, and food access and food justice, all in its design. And it addresses that intrinsically. The next slide, just showing some of the areas when we start to look at intervention in this system. There are so many ways that entrepreneurs and social activists can work together. And this is just a quick diagram of the complexity of the supply chain. And each of these is an opportunity for intervention and innovation. But if we don't look at it collectively, and if we are not asking constantly what factors are outside the subsystem we want to create, we will never truly create a dynamic system capable of evolving. So there's three big, next slide, for being a change maker, there's really three big economies that we have to learn how to navigate and become skillful at. Number one is the economy of people's intentions. People now want to know what companies are up to, what their purpose is, what their reason for being is, and where they're really coming from. And that goes for leaders as well. Then there's the economy of attention. We all know well about this. Social media is based upon it, but we still have to exist. We, plant-based change makers, have to be able to exist and excel in that arena as well. And then lastly, there's the economy of our actions, which is how we verify the transparency of what we're actually doing. If you want to look at it a different way, you see that it's easy or simple as three circles. There are three narratives or meta-narratives that drive those activities. First is the mental, linguistic, and behavioral technologies. Below that are the actual material flows and realities. And then over on the right, the socio-political ecologies. So this is why the way Will and the team has assembled this Plant Futures Conference is so critical, because we cannot make the change in the system without being conversant in all three ecologies. And I won't be able to speak because of the time to the rest of the slides, so I'll just pop through them just so you see the headlines. One, next slide, was just to look within those deeper meta-narratives in the three aspects of personal health, economic factors, and social and cultural transformation, all the things that are driving that. These are opportunity areas for entrepreneurs and change makers. And we'll be able to share these slides, Will, later with the team.
Greg, I'm going to suggest that just in the interest of time, that we actually plan with the students who are participating, the Berkeley students, and those participating in the Challenge Lab section of the course, that we schedule a deeper dive because these ideas and concepts are so central to me and deep, and they really just deserve a full conversation. So this is just a little taste of your thinking, and we'll look forward to that.
Okay, if you go to this, I just want to end on one note of opportunity for the students. Next slide, and then quickly the next one after it. Because in disruption, which is disruption not to disrupt, but disruption to transform, that small can be really beautiful, and developing your positioning of your ideas, what I call craft-based approaches, which means getting involved early, developing an audience or customers and interacting with them on a very detailed way, is a very effective way to regenerate the system. And while vertical integration and scale provides efficiencies and big change fast, innovation and authenticity are what's driving this new economy. So I just want to underscore that above all as the note of,
inclusiveness, really, and opportunity.
Yeah.
And I just want to encourage all the learners present to join Greg later in the breakout session to continue the conversation. We're sorry about the tech problems today, Greg, but we're grateful that you've been here. We really appreciate the deep thinking that you've been doing, and you've had such a unique kind of view. I mean, you've basically been defining the edge of this sector for quite a while. So we really appreciate your insights.
Well, you as well, Will, and thank you very much. And the new energy from this group that's hung in here the whole 2 days is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's a new chapter, and it's multi-generational.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Okay.